Good evening, boys and girls, morning, afternoon. Reviewing what we read yesterday, Harry lives in the cupboard underneath the stairs, and it's Dudley's birthday, and he got 37 presents, which is an obnoxious number. And for Dudley's birthday, they always go on a trip, but Harry isn't allowed to go. He has to stay with Miss Fig. However, this year he's able to go because Mrs. Fig broke her leg, and so she's not able to watch Harry. And one of their friends comes along, and this time they get an ice cream treat, and he's saying that Dudley looks like a gorilla. And then they get to the snake, which is sleeping, and now we're at the point where Harry approaches the snake cage, and here's an illustration of the snake cage. The snake suddenly opened its beady eyes. Slowly, very slowly, it raised its head until its eyes were on a level with Harry's. It winked. Go get a napkin. Harry stared. Then he looked quickly around to see if anyone was watching. They weren't. He looked back at the snake and winked too. The snake jerked its head toward Uncle Vernon and Dudley, then raised its eyes to the ceiling. It gave Harry a look that said, quite plainly, "I get that all the time." "I know," Harry murmured through the glass, though he wasn't sure the snake could hear him. "It must be really annoying." The snake nodded vigorously. "Where do you come from, anyway?" Harry asked. The snake jabbed its tail at a little sign next to the glass. Harry peered at it. "Boa constrictor, Brazil." "Was it nice there?" The boa constrictor jabbed its tail at the sign again, and Harry read on. "This specimen was bred in the zoo." "Oh, I see. So you've never been to Brazil?" As the snake shook its head, a deafening sound behind Harry made both of them jump. "Dudley! Mr. Dursley! Come and look at this snake! You won't believe what it's doing!" Dudley came waddling toward them as fast as he could. "Out of the way," he said, punching Harry in the ribs. Caught by surprise, Harry fell hard on the concrete floor. What came next happened so fast no one saw how it happened. 1 second, Pierce and Dudley were leaning right up close to the glass. The next, they had leapt back with howls of horror. Harry sat up and gasped. The glass front of the boa constrictor's tank had vanished. The great snake was uncoiling itself rapidly, slithering out on the floor. People throughout the reptile house screamed and started running for the exits. So think about that. Harry was talking to the snake, and it was almost like he was having a conversation with the snake because the snake was responding to him and telling him where to get the information with sign language or body language. And now, all of a sudden, Dudley and his friend, what was his friend's name? Pierce, were up against the cage, and the glass just disappeared and vanished. And so now it's like the big boa constrictor is out. As the snake slid swiftly past him, Harry could have sworn a low hissing voice said, "Brazil, here I come." "Thanks, amigo." The keeper of the reptile house was in shock. "But the glass?" he kept saying. "Where did the glass go?" The zoo director himself made Aunt Petunia a cup of strong, sweet tea while he apologized over and over again. Pierce and Dudley could only gibber. As far as Harry had seen, the snake hadn't done anything except snap playfully at their heels as it passed. But by the time they were all back in Uncle Vernon's car, Dudley was telling them how it had nearly bitten off his leg, while Pierce was swearing it had tried to squeeze him to death. But worst of all, for Harry, at least, was Pierce calming down enough to say Harry was talking to it. "Weren't you, Harry?" Uncle Vernon waited until Pierce was safely out of the house before starting on Harry. He was so angry he could hardly speak. He managed to say, "Go, cupboard, stay, no meals." before he collapsed into a chair and Aunt Petunia had to run and get him a large brandy. And there's an illustration of the snake inside the reptile house, chasing or slithering away. Harry lay in his dark cupboard much later, wishing he had a watch. He didn't know what time it was, and he couldn't be sure the Dursleys were asleep yet. Until they were, he couldn't risk sneaking to the kitchen for some food. He'd lived with the Dursleys almost 10 years, 10 miserable years, as long as he could remember, ever since he'd been a baby and his parents had died in that car crash. He couldn't remember being in the car when his parents had died. Sometimes, when he strained his memory during long hours in his cupboard, he came up with a strange vision. A blinding flash of green light and a burning pain on his forehead. This, he supposed, was the crash, though he couldn't imagine where all the green light came from. He couldn't remember his parents at all. His aunt and uncle never spoke about them, and of course he was forbidden to ask questions. There were no photographs of them in the house. When he had been younger, Harry had dreamed and dreamed of some unknown relation coming to take him away, but it had never happened. The Dursleys were his only family, yet sometimes he thought, or maybe he hoped, that strangers in the street seemed to know him. Very strange strangers. They were, too. A tiny man in a violet top hat had bowed to him once, while out shopping with Aunt Petunia and Dudley. After asking Harry furiously if he knew the man, Aunt Petunia had rushed them out of the shop without buying anything. A wild-looking old woman dressed all in green and had waved merrily at him once on a bus. Who do you think these people are that are waving at him and bowing at him? You don't know? Who do you think?
Maybe his mom and dad's friends.
Maybe mom and dad's friends. Good guess.
Me too.
You think that too? Okay. That's a good guess. A bald man in a very long purple coat had actually shaken his hand in the street the other day and then walked away without a word. The weirdest thing about all these people was the way they seemed to vanish the second Harry tried to get a closer look. At school, Harry had no one. Everybody knew that Dudley's gang hated that odd Harry Potter in his baggy old clothes and broken glasses, and nobody liked to disagree with Dudley's gang, because what would they do? What would Dudley's people do?
Punch him?
Yeah, probably beat him up. Chapter 3, The Letters from No One. And so it looks like some kind of talons. Those are the claws. Holding a letter. You think it's an owl? What do you think it is?
Owl.
You think it's an owl too? And then that's Dudley.
All
right, Chapter 3, The Letters from No One. The escape of the Brazilian boa constrictor earned Harry his longest ever punishment. By the time he was allowed out of his cupboard again, the summer holidays had started and Dudley had already broken his new kind camera, crashed his remote control aeroplane, and first time on the racing bike, knocked down old Mrs. Figg as she crossed Private Drive on her crutches. Harry was glad school was over, but there was no escaping Dudley's gang, who visited the house every single day. Pierce, Dennis, Malcolm, and Gordon were all big and stupid. But as Dudley was the biggest and stupidest of the group, he was the leader. The rest of them were all quite happy to join in Dudley's favorite sport, Harry hunting. This was why Harry spent as much time as possible out of the house, wandering around and thinking about the end of the holidays, where he could see a tiny ray of hope. When September came, he would be going off to secondary school, and for the first time in his life, he wouldn't be with Dudley. Can you scoot over a little bit, please, so I can move my arm? Thank you. Dudley had a place at Uncle Vernon's old school, Smeltings. Pierce Polkiss was going there, too. Harry, on the other hand, was going to Stonewall High, the local comprehensive. Dudley thought this was very funny. They stuff people's heads down the toilet first day at Stonewall, he told Harry. Want to come upstairs and practice? No thanks, said Harry. The poor toilets never had anything as horrible as your head down it. It might be sick. Then he ran before Dudley could work out what he'd said. One day in July, Aunt Petunia took Dudley to London to buy his Smeltings uniforms, leaving Harry at Miss Figg's. Mrs. Figg wasn't as bad as usual. It turned out she'd broken her leg tripping over one of her cats, and she didn't seem quite as fond of them as before. She let Harry watch television and gave him a bit of chocolate cake that tasted as though she'd had it for several years. So how do you think the cake tasted? Nasty. That evening, Dudley paraded around the living room for the family in his brand new uniform. Smelting boys wore maroon tailcoats, orange knickerbockers, and flat straw hats called boaters. Knickerbockers are pants. They also carried knobby sticks, used for hitting each other while the teachers weren't looking. This was supposed to be good training for later life. As he looked at Dudley in his new knickerbockers, Uncle Vernon said gruffly that it was the proudest moment of his life. Aunt Petunia burst into tears and said she couldn't believe it was her Ickle Dicklekins. He looked so handsome and grown up. Harry didn't trust himself to speak. He thought 2 of his ribs might already have cracked from trying not to laugh. There was a horrible smell in the kitchen next morning when Harry went in for breakfast. It seemed to be coming from a large metal tub in the sink. He went to have a look. The tub was full of what looked like dirty rags swimming in gray water. "What's this?" he asked Aunt Petunia. Her lips tightened, as they always did if he dared to ask a question. "Your new school uniform," she said. Harry looked in the bowl again. "Oh," he said. "I didn't realize it had to be so wet." "Don't be stupid," snapped Aunt Petunia. "I'm dyeing some of Dudley's old things gray for you. It'll look just like everyone else's when I'm finished." Harry seriously doubted this, but thought it best not to argue. He sat down at the table and tried not to think about how he was going to look on his first day at Stonewall High. Like he was wearing bits of old elephant skin, probably. Dudley and Uncle Vernon came in, both with wrinkled noses because of the smell from Harry's new uniform. Uncle Vernon opened the newspaper as usual, and Dudley banged his smelting stick, which he carried everywhere, on the table. They heard the click of the letter box. Please stop. And flop of letters on the doormat. "Get the post, Dudley," said Uncle Vernon from behind his paper. "Make Harry get it." "Get the post, Harry." "Make Dudley get it." "Poke him with your smelting stick, Dudley." Harry dodged the smelting stick and went to get the post. 3 things lay on the doormat: a postcard from Uncle Vernon's sister Marge, who was holidaying on the Isle of Wight, a brown envelope that looked like a bill, and a letter for Harry. Harry picked it up and stared at it, his heart twinkling with a giant elastic band, like a giant elastic band. No one ever in his whole life had written to him. Who would? He had no friends, no other relatives. He didn't belong to the library, so he'd never even gotten rude notes asking for books back. Yet here it was, a letter addressed so plainly there could be no mistake. Mr. H. Potter, The Cupboard Under the Stairs, 4 Private Drive, Little Winging, Surrey. There's something peculiar about what the address on there. Where did they say he lived?
Under the stairs.
Yeah, they knew he lived under the stairs. So whoever is sending him this letter knows that Harry lives under the stairs. The envelope was thick and heavy, made of yellowish parchment, and the address was written in emerald green ink. There was no stamp. That's strange. And parchment is paper. Turning the envelope over, his hand trembling, Harry saw a purple wax seal bearing a coat of arms, a lion, an eagle, a badger, and a snake, surrounding a large letter H. And actually, I have a charm with it on there. So if y'all ask me, I'll show it to you. It's on one of my bracelets. I have a Harry Potter bracelet. "Hurry up, boys," shouted Uncle Vernon from the kitchen. What are you doing? Checking the letter bombs? He chuckled at his own joke. Harry went back to the kitchen, still staring at his letter. He handed Uncle Vernon the bill and the postcard, sat down, and slowly began to open the yellow envelope. Uncle Vernon ripped open the bill, snorted in disgust, and flipped over the postcard. Marge is ill, he informed Aunt Petunia. Ate a funny Dad, said Dudley suddenly. Dad, Harry's got something. Harry was on the point of unfolding his letter, which was written on the same heavy parchment as the envelope, when it was jerked sharply out of his hand by Uncle Vernon. That's mine, said Harry, trying to snatch it back. Who'd be writing to you? Sneered Uncle Vernon, shaking the letter open with one hand and glancing at it. His face went from red to green faster than a set of traffic lights. And it didn't stop there. Within seconds, it was the grayish-white of old porridge. Petunia, he gasped. And we will stop there. Go ahead and share with your shoulder partner. What do you think in the letter has made Uncle Vernon gasp? Go ahead.